The moment I saw my husband step out of a luxury hotel elevator with another woman, he thought the worst thing he'd face was being exposed. What he didn't realize was that while he stood frozen, trying to explain himself, my mind was already moving. Quietly, carefully, and with purpose. I didn't scream or chase him. I walked away, made one call, and set something in motion that would soon flip his world upside down and leave him terrified of what was coming next. Before I tell you how everything unfolded, take a second to support this story. Stay with me, let me know where you're watching from, and help this moment reach people who might need it as much as I once did. I had just landed that morning, jet-lagged and emotionally drained after months overseas. The city looked the same, but I felt different, older somehow, heavier, like life had quietly added weight to my shoulders while I wasn't looking. My best friend squeezed my hand inside the rideshare SUV, her excitement spilling over. "I swear, I thought you weren't coming back," she said, laughing. "I was ready to book a flight and drag you home myself." I smiled weakly. "Relax. I missed my kids too much to disappear forever." She leaned back, satisfied. "Good, because I booked us rooms at the Monarch Grand. We're celebrating properly tonight. No excuses." That name made my stomach tighten. The Monarch Grand was where executives stayed, where mirrors shone brighter than people, where secrets hid behind champagne flutes. "Isn't that a bit much?" I asked. "We could just grab drinks somewhere simple." "No way," she said firmly. "You survived living abroad. I survived motherhood and marriage. We're doing this right." I nodded, brushing away the unease. "By the way, didn't my husband say he'd pick me up?" She sighed. "Work emergency. He left early this morning. 3 days. Took the bigger SUV too." I remembered how he'd hugged me at the door, how he'd kissed my forehead and said he'd miss me, how he told me to take a rideshare if I went out, just to be safe. The memory stung, but I forced a smile and started talking about the kids. How my son had figured out how to climb chairs to steal candy. How my daughter had turned half the house into an art studio. Talking about them always grounded me, always reminded me who I was beyond being someone's wife. We reached the hotel quickly. The lobby glowed with marble and soft gold light. While my friend checked in, I was mid-sentence about my daughter's latest painting phase when her fingers dug into my arm. "Don't move," she whispered. "Look." A glass elevator was descending slowly from the upper floors. Inside stood a man in a gray polo shirt I recognized instantly because I'd bought it myself. His arm was wrapped around a young woman's waist. He leaned in, whispering something that made her laugh and cling to him. My heart dropped so fast it felt physical. It was my husband, the same man who was supposed to be on a business trip. The same man who had promised to call me every night. The same man who had kissed me goodbye that very morning. The elevator doors opened. He stepped out laughing, then looked up. Our eyes met. The color drained from his face. His arm froze midair. The woman beside him tightened her grip, lifting her chin as if daring me to challenge her. My friend surged forward, shaking with rage, but I stopped her. "No," I said quietly. I didn't recognize my own voice, steady, calm, terrifyingly controlled. No tears came. No words followed. Something cold and sharp settled inside me instead. I turned to the receptionist and smiled politely. "I'd like to cancel our reservation. This place suddenly feels unclean." Without looking back, I walked out. Behind me, I heard my husband calling my name, his voice cracking. My phone started vibrating immediately. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. In the taxi, messages poured in, confusion, apologies, lies dressed as explanations. I stared out the window as the city lights slid past, feeling something shift deep inside my chest. I wasn't going home to argue. I was going home to prepare. When I reached the house, the front door swung open. He stood there like a man drowning, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, hair a mess. "You're finally home," he said desperately. "I can explain. It's not what you think." I stepped past him without answering and sat down on the couch, crossing my legs calmly. "Sit," said. Something in my tone made him obey. He launched into excuses, client obligations, misunderstandings, promises that nothing happened. I listened silently, then pulled out my phone. I pressed play. The recording filled the room. A hotel receptionist confirming his reservation. A couple suite. His name. Her name. The color drained from his face. I stopped the audio and looked at him, my expression empty. "I'm giving you two choices," I said evenly. "Tomorrow morning, we file an uncontested divorce. Fair split. Full custody for me. Quiet and clean." He started to protest. "Or," I continued, cutting him off, "this recording goes to your parents, your company, and every client who trusts you." For the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. That night, his parents arrived. By morning, everything he thought protected him, money, reputation, control, was crumbling. And as I watched him unravel, one truth became clear. This wasn't about anger. It was about consequences. And I was just getting started. By sunrise, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. My husband hadn't slept. I could tell by the way his shoulders slumped and his eyes darted whenever I moved. His parents sat at the dining table in rigid silence, their faces carved from disappointment. Coffee went untouched. The ticking clock sounded louder than it ever had. I moved through the kitchen calmly, packing lunches for the kids like it was any other weekday. That ordinary routine seemed to unnerve him more than shouting ever could. "You're really doing this," he said hoarsely, finally breaking the silence. I didn't look at him. "I told you your options." His father cleared his throat. "Son, you embarrassed this family. You don't get to negotiate now." My husband flinched like he'd been slapped. His mother turned to me, eyes red. "I'm so sorry. We raised him better than this." I nodded once, accepting the apology without warmth. Sympathy didn't change facts. After the kids left for school, I placed a folder on the table, thick, organized, precise. It held bank statements, property deeds, investment summaries. Every number documented. Every account traced. His hands shook as he flipped through it. How long have you been keeping this?" he asked. "Long enough," I replied. He swallowed hard. "There's one thing missing." I met his gaze for the first time that morning. The Midtown condo, Unit 702, bought 2 years ago under a shell account. His face went gray. "I allowed you to think you were clever," I continued calmly. "That was your mistake." Silence crushed the room. "I'll sign," he whispered. By noon, the paperwork was in motion. By evening, the narrative he'd built of control, superiority, inevitability was collapsing faster than he could stop it. But I knew better than to relax. Men like him didn't surrender. They waited. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The lobby buzzed with quiet conversations and polite smiles. I took a number and waited. When my turn came, the account manager barely glanced at my documents before pushing them back. "You're missing a certificate," he said flatly. I recognized obstruction when I saw it. "I'm not," I replied evenly. "And you know it." He smirked. "Bank policy." I stood, ready to leave and escalate through other channels, when a calm voice interrupted. "That won't be necessary." The manager stiffened instantly. A man stood beside me, mid-40s, composed, eyes sharp but unreadable. He said one word, quietly. The color drained from the manager's face. "Process her request. Now." Within minutes, the accounts were frozen. The arrogance vanished, replaced by frantic efficiency. Outside, I caught up to the man. "Thank you," I said honestly. He smiled faintly. "Some people mistake silence for weakness. I find that dangerous." He handed me a card and walked away. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from my best friend. "You won't believe this. The biggest competitor crushing your husband's company? Same last name as the man who helped you today. I stared at the card in my hand. So the chessboard was bigger than I'd thought. Good, because I wasn't done playing yet. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake listening to the steady breathing of my children down the hall, the familiar sounds of the house settling around us. For years, I had mistaken routine for safety. Now, every creak felt like a reminder of how fragile comfort could be when built on someone else's honesty. The business card sat on my nightstand, face down. I hadn't called the number. Not yet. I didn't trust coincidence anymore. The next morning, my husband left the house under his father's supervision. No phone, no laptop, no freedom to spin stories or hide money. Watching him walk out like a scolded child should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt final. I took the kids to school myself that day. My son was unusually quiet, staring out the window with his jaw set. My daughter hummed softly, unaware that her world had already shifted. "Mom," my son finally said, "are you and Dad fighting?" I took a breath. "We're not fighting. We're changing." He frowned. "Is it because of that lady?" So he had seen more than I thought. "Yes," I said honestly, "and because your father broke a rule that matters." He didn't say anything else, but when he got out of the car, he hesitated, then hugged me quickly before running inside. That small gesture tightened something in my chest. At home, I began the work I'd been quietly preparing for years. I inventoried everything again: emails, messages, calendar inconsistencies, unexplained transfers. Patterns emerged once I looked without emotional fog. My husband hadn't just cheated. He'd grown careless, entitled. Men like that always did. By noon, my phone rang. It was his mother. "I spoke to the lawyer," she said. "He agrees with your terms. Your husband doesn't have a choice." "I know," I replied. There was a pause. "You planned this," she said softly. "I prepared," I corrected. Another silence. Then, "If I'd had your clarity years ago, my life would have been different." That surprised me. In the afternoon, my best friend showed up with takeout and fierce determination. "I heard everything," she said, dropping the bags on the counter. "And before you say anything, no, I'm not calming down." She paced the kitchen. "Do you know how smug he looked in that hotel? Like nothing could touch him." I smiled faintly. "He doesn't look like that anymore." "No," she agreed. "But he's not done. Men like him don't lose quietly." "I know." She stopped pacing and looked at me carefully. "So what's next?" I glanced toward the nightstand where the business card waited. "I find out why someone that powerful stepped in," I said, "and whether their help came with strings." That evening, after the kids were asleep, I finally turned the card over. The name meant nothing to me. The number even less. I dialed it anyway. He answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said calmly. "I don't like surprises," I replied. "Neither do I," he said. "That's why I intervene early." We met the next day in a quiet cafe far from downtown. He arrived on time, ordered nothing, and watched the room like a man used to thinking 3 moves ahead. "You didn't help me out of kindness," I said bluntly. He smiled. "No, I helped because your husband underestimated you. That kind of arrogance ruins businesses. So this is about competition." "Partly," he admitted, "but mostly it's about leverage." I leaned back. "And what leverage do you want from me?" He studied me for a long moment. "Nothing. Yet." I didn't like that answer. He continued, "Your husband's company is bleeding. He's made enemies he doesn't even know about. When people like him fall, there's collateral damage. I prefer to contain it." "And my role?" "To stay exactly as you are," he said. "Calm, precise, unpredictable." I laughed softly. "That's not reassuring." "It's honest," he replied, "which is more than he ever gave you." When I left the cafe, the sky had darkened. Storm clouds gathered, heavy and inevitable. At home, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from my husband, begging, bargaining, threatening in subtle ways. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded everything to my lawyer and turned the phone off. The next day brought the birthday invitation. His father's 70th, a formal event. Family and business partners. My husband called, voice shaking. Please, he said, just pretend for one night. For my dad. I stared at the wall, thinking of the years I'd pretended for him. Fine, I said. One night. He exhaled in relief. He had no idea what that agreement would cost him. Because while he thought the party would save his image, I knew something he didn't. Public stages weren't for forgiveness. They were for endings. And this one would be unforgettable. The ballroom glittered like a polished lie. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over hundreds of well-dressed guests. Laughter rising and falling in practiced waves. Waiters moved smoothly between tables, balancing champagne flutes and delicate plates as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. From the outside, it looked like a perfect family celebration. Standing beside my husband at the entrance, I felt the weight of every step I took across that marble floor. His hand hovered near my elbow, unsure whether he was allowed to touch me. I had made my condition clear on the drive over. Don't, I had said, my voice flat. Not tonight. Not ever again. He nodded too quickly, grateful I'd agreed to come at all. Guests turned to look at us as we entered. Familiar faces smiled, nodding approvingly. Whispers followed, about how strong we looked together, how we'd weathered rumors so well, how lucky he was to have a wife like me. Each compliment felt like a test of my composure. I passed them all. His parents waited near the head table. His mother rushed forward first, grasping my hands tightly. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, eyes shining with relief. "This means everything to him. To us." I gave her a polite smile. "It's your husband's birthday. Of course I'd be here." His father studied me more carefully, his sharp gaze lingering a second longer than comfortable. I met his eyes without flinching. "Good," he said finally. "Let's enjoy the evening." The band struck up a soft melody. The party flowed into motion. For a while, it almost felt surreal, like stepping back into a life I'd already left. My husband laughed too loudly at jokes, basked in praise, even began to relax. I could see it in his posture, the way his shoulders loosened. Hope was creeping back in. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Thank you," he murmured. "After tonight, maybe we can talk again. Really talk." I didn't answer. Across the room, business associates raised glasses. Old friends clapped him on the back. Cameras flashed. He was forgetting one crucial thing. I hadn't come to save him. I had come to finish this. When the speeches began, I excused myself from the table and walked calmly toward the bar. I could feel eyes following me, curious, speculative. A woman alone always drew attention. That was exactly what I wanted. I took my time, sipping water, waiting. And then the room shifted. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. A woman stepped inside wearing a fitted white dress, heels sharp enough to announce her confidence with every step. She carried a gift wrapped in gold paper and wore a smile that didn't belong there. Her. The murmur spread like a ripple through water. My husband saw her at the same moment I did. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. He half rose from his chair, panic written in every line of his body. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the head table. I watched him glance around desperately, eyes finally landing on me. He looked relieved, certain I would intervene, smooth things over, protect him like I always had. I smiled. She reached him and placed a hand on his arm. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice carrying just far enough. "You didn't tell me tonight was such a big family event." Gasps and whispers erupted. His mother froze. His father's jaw tightened. My husband stammered, This isn't. Why are you here?" She pouted slightly. "I brought your father a gift. It would have been rude not to come." Her fingers tightened possessively around his arm. I set my glass down and walked toward them. The crowd parted instinctively. Every step felt steady, grounded. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I stopped in front of her and extended my hand with a gracious smile. "You must be her," I said warmly. She blinked, confused. "Excuse me." "I'm his wife," I continued, as if making introductions at a garden party. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Her expression faltered. She hadn't expected this. "Oh," she said stiffly. "I didn't realize." "Oh, don't worry," I interrupted gently. "We've all realized quite a lot recently." I turned to the guests, lifting my voice just enough to carry. "Since everyone is gathered here tonight," I said, smiling brightly, "I thought it might be a good time to share some happy news." The room went silent. My husband looked like he might collapse. I placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, steering her gently to the empty seat beside him at the head table. "Please," I said kindly, "sit. You're part of this story too." Someone laughed nervously. No one moved. I reached for the microphone on the podium before anyone could stop me. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate such a milestone." I began smoothly. 70 years of life deserves honesty, don't you think? His father's eyes burned into mine. "Yes," he said slowly. "It does." I nodded. "Then let's be honest." I turned toward my husband. "This woman," I said calmly, "is the person my husband chose while still married to me." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. I continued before anyone could interrupt. "And since he found what he believes is true love, I wouldn't want to stand in the way." I reached into my clutch and withdrew 2 neatly printed documents and a pen. "I came prepared," I said, placing them on the table. "Divorce papers. Fair. Signed and ready." The sound of paper hitting glass echoed like a gunshot. His father stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. "Is this true?" he demanded. My husband tried to speak, but no sound came out. The woman beside him looked horrified now, realization dawning too late. I met my father-in-law's gaze calmly. Every word. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then his father's voice thundered through the hall. "Sign it." My husband stared at him in disbelief. "Dad." I said, "Sign it," he roared. "You've disgraced this family enough." Hands shaking, my husband reached for the pen. The woman yanked her hand away from his arm, eyes darting around the room, suddenly very alone. As he signed, whispers turned into open murmurs. Phones came out. Reputations cracked in real time. I collected the papers, folded them carefully, and turned toward the stunned guests. "Thank you for witnessing this," I said politely. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." I walked out without looking back. Behind me, a life I had outgrown collapsed under its own weight, and I felt nothing but relief. Because the real battle, the one over custody, money, and control, was still ahead. And now, everyone knew exactly who they were dealing with. The silence that followed me out of the ballroom felt heavier than the noise I'd left behind. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp enough to clear my head. I stood under the hotel's wide awning for a moment, breathing in slowly, letting the last tremor of adrenaline drain from my body. Inside those walls, my husband's carefully curated life was unraveling in front of everyone who mattered to him. Out here, I felt strangely light. My phone vibrated. Message after message poured in. Missed calls from unknown numbers, frantic texts from relatives, business associates suddenly concerned, people who hadn't spoken to me in years now desperate to understand what had just happened. I ignored all of it. I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. I was interested in outcomes. I went home alone that night. The house was dark and quiet, the children already asleep at his parents' place, where they'd been taken earlier for the party. I moved through the rooms, turning on lamps, grounding myself in the familiar textures of my own life. This house, every corner of it, was something I had built, managed, protected. He had just lived in it. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. By morning, the consequences began arriving in waves. The first call came from his company's legal department. Polite, careful, asking for confirmation that the separation was official, asking whether there were any issues they should be aware of. There are, I replied calmly, and your counsel already has copies. They went quiet. The second call came from his mother. Her voice shook. Your father-in-law is furious. He locked your husband in the guest room last night. Took his phone, his laptop, everything. I know, I said. How? She asked, startled. I plan ahead. There was a pause. Then, quietly, I'm sorry it came to this. So am I replied. And for the first time, I meant it. That afternoon, I met my lawyer. We spread documents across a long conference table. Assets, timelines, agreements, contingency plans. He listened carefully as I laid out what had happened at the party, nodding slowly. You handled it cleanly, he said finally. Public pressure changes everything. He won't be able to stall now. I don't want him to stall, I said. I want this finished. My lawyer smiled faintly. That's the difference between reacting and controlling the process. Exactly. 2 days later, my husband was finally allowed to call me. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Can we talk? He asked. Privately. We are, I replied. You called. He swallowed. I didn't think you'd go that far. I leaned back in my chair. You didn't think I'd stop protecting you. Silence stretched between us. You humiliated me, he said weakly. You humiliated yourself, I corrected. I just stopped hiding it. His breathing grew uneven. What do you want? I had been waiting for that question. I want what's fair, I said calmly. And I want you to stop trying to control the narrative. You already lost that right. I'll do anything, he said quickly. Just don't destroy me. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I'm not destroying you. I'm stepping out of the way while you do it yourself. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, my son came home. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, backpack still on, eyes uncertain. He had always been close to his father, admiring him, absorbing his confidence, his entitlement without realizing it. Mom, he said quietly, is it true? I set aside my papers and looked at him fully. Yes. He clenched his jaw. Dad says you overreacted. I nodded once. Of course he does. But everyone's talking about it, he said. At school. At Grandma's. Everywhere. I patted the seat beside me. Come here. He sat, shoulders tense. Listen to me, I said gently. What your father did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And choices have consequences. That doesn't mean he stops being your father. But it does mean I stop accepting less than respect. He frowned. Dad says money fixes things. I met his eyes. Money hides things. It doesn't fix them. He thought about that for a long moment. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Unknown. If you need assistance finalizing matters, let me know. I stared at the screen. It was him. The man from the bank. I typed back slowly. Me, why are you helping me? The reply came quickly. Unknown. Because men like your husband don't learn from mercy. Only structure. I exhaled. Me. Then we understand each other. Unknown, good. Because this isn't over yet. He was right. Because while the social damage was done, the financial war was just beginning. And my husband, desperate and cornered, was about to make his worst mistake yet. Trying to move money he thought I couldn't see. What he didn't know was that I had already anticipated it. And when he made that move, it would be the final proof I needed. The kind that doesn't just end marriages. It ends careers. The transfer attempt happened 3 days later. Clumsy, rushed, and exactly the way desperation always looks when it thinks it's being clever. I was in the kitchen packing my daughter's lunch when my phone buzzed with an alert from the monitoring service my lawyer had quietly activated months earlier, back when I first noticed unexplained gaps in our finances. At the time, I'd told myself it was just good household management. Now I knew better. Unauthorized activity detected. I didn't react immediately. I finished slicing fruit, zipped the lunchbox, and kissed my daughter's forehead before she ran off to school. Only after the front door closed did I sit down at the table and open the alert. He had tried to move a large sum from a joint investment account into a newly opened offshore holding structure, one of those paper-thin entities that promised privacy to people who mistook secrecy for intelligence. It was sloppy, rushed. Fear makes people careless. I forwarded the alert to my lawyer with one line. He's panicking. The reply came within minutes. Good. Let him. By noon, the bank had frozen the account completely. Not partially. Completely. The attempted transfer triggered automatic compliance reviews, internal audits, and, most importantly, a paper trail he couldn't erase. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was his father. "I need you to come over," he said, voice strained. "Now." I arrived to find my husband slumped on the couch, pale and hollow-eyed, while his parents stood rigid near the window like disappointed judges. "He tried to move money," his father said without preamble. "Behind your back. After everything." I looked at my husband. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I warned you," I said quietly. "This is what happens when you keep lying." He finally looked up then, eyes wild. "I had no choice. You're taking everything." "I'm taking what's legal," I corrected. "And what you tried to hide." His mother covered her mouth, shocked. "You promised us you'd stop." He broke then. Not with tears. Those would have required humility, but with anger. "You planned this," he spat. "You waited. You trapped me." I tilted my head, slightly. "No. I watched you. There's a difference." His father's voice thundered through the room. "Enough. You've embarrassed this family beyond repair." He turned to me. "From now on, we will cooperate fully. You'll get what you're owed. He'll get supervision." My husband stared at his parents in disbelief. "You're siding with her?" His mother answered softly, "We're siding with the truth." That night, I took my son aside. He'd been quieter lately, watching, absorbing, recalibrating his understanding of the man he once idolized. "Your dad made another bad choice," I told him gently. "That doesn't mean you have to carry it." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to be like him." I pulled him into a hug, my chest tightening. "Then you won't be." The next week passed in a blur of meetings and signatures, court filings, asset disclosures, compliance interviews. Every attempt my husband made to regain control only dug him deeper into consequences he couldn't talk his way out of. And then the call came. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. "You were right," the calm voice said. He moved faster than expected. "I assumed he would," I replied. "His company is being audited," the man continued. "Not because of you, but because of what your situation exposed." I closed my eyes briefly. "So it's begun." "Yes," he said, "and it won't stop." There was a pause. "You could walk away now," he added. "Let the system finish it." I thought about my children, about the years I'd spent smoothing over his mistakes, protecting his image, carrying weight that was never meant to be mine. "I'm not walking away," I said calmly. "I'm stepping forward." He seemed pleased by that. "Then prepare yourself," he said. "This next phase won't be private." He was right, because once financial institutions start asking questions, silence stops being an option. Stories leak, allies vanish, and the man who once believed he was untouchable would soon realize something far worse than exposure was coming. Not noise, not humiliation, but accountability. And by the time he understood that difference, it would already be too late. By the time the auditors made their first official visit to my husband's office, The illusion of control he had clung to for years was already gone. The call came early in the morning. I was tying my son's shoelaces when my phone vibrated on the counter. One glance at the screen told me everything. His name, flashing again after days of silence. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Less than an hour later, my best friend called instead. "It's happening," she said without preamble. "People are talking. Not gossip, real talk. Compliance teams, legal advisors, partners asking questions he can't dodge." I closed my eyes briefly. "Good." "He's spiraling," she continued, snapping at staff, canceling meetings. Someone said he locked himself in his office for 2 hours. I imagined it easily, him pacing, running his hands through his hair, replaying every decision that had led him here. For the first time, there was no one left to clean up after him. That afternoon, his lawyer requested an emergency meeting. I arrived calm, composed, prepared. He arrived disheveled, eyes bloodshot, suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. "We need to talk," his lawyer began carefully. "The situation has escalated." My husband slammed his palm on the table. "Because of her," he snapped, pointing at me. "She set this up." The lawyer raised a hand. "No, this is because you attempted to conceal assets during an act of divorce. Banks are obligated to report irregularities." I met my husband's gaze evenly. "I told you not to do that." He laughed bitterly. "You enjoyed this, watching me fall." I leaned forward slightly. "No, I enjoyed watching the truth surface." Silence filled the room. The lawyer cleared his throat. "At this point, cooperation is your only option." My husband's shoulders sagged. "And if I don't?" The answer came from me, not the lawyer. "Then everything you worked so hard to hide becomes public record." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "When did you become like this?" he whispered. I didn't answer right away. "When I stopped confusing loyalty with self-erasure," I said finally. That night, my son knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom," he asked quietly. I set aside my laptop. "Come in." He sat at the edge of the bed, twisting his fingers. "Dad's in trouble, isn't he?" "Yes," I said honestly. "Is it because of the money or because of what he did to you?" I took a deep breath. "It's because actions stack up, and eventually they collapse under their own weight." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked. I pulled him into a hug. "We already are." The next few days were relentless. Emails from financial institutions, requests for documentation, subpoenas issued with cold efficiency. The kind of pressure that didn't shout, it squeezed. My husband tried once more to reach me directly. He showed up at the house unannounced. I saw him through the window before I opened the door. He looked thinner, smaller. "I just want to talk," he said when I stepped outside. "We're talking now," I replied, staying on the porch. "I never thought you'd do this," he said hoarsely. "I thought you needed me." I studied him quietly. "I needed honesty. You needed admiration." He flinched. "I can fix this," he insisted. "If you back off. If you tell them it was a misunderstanding." I shook my head. "This stopped being about me the moment you tried to cheat the system." His face twisted in frustration. "So that's it? You're done?" I held his gaze steadily. "I was done the moment I realized peace required distance from you." He left without another word. That evening, I received another message from the man who had quietly altered the course of things weeks ago. "Unknown, he's being pushed out." Me, from where? "Unknown, everywhere that matters." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Me, and after that? Unknown. After that, he has to live with who he is without the armor. I looked around my home, at the children's drawings on the fridge, the calm order I had rebuilt piece by piece. Me. That's not my problem anymore. Unknown, exactly. As night settled in, I stood by the window, watching the lights flicker on across the city. For years, I had believed strength meant endurance. That love meant staying. That silence meant peace. I knew better now. Strength was clarity. Love was mutual respect. And silence, when chosen, was power. The storm my husband feared was no longer coming. It had already passed, and I was standing in the quiet aftermath, finally free to decide what came next. By the time autumn arrived, the city felt different to me, not because it had changed, but because I had. The headlines never mentioned my name. They didn't need to. My husband's fall was reported in dry, professional language. Internal restructuring, ethical review, leadership transition. Polite phrases masking a very public unraveling. His company announced his indefinite leave, then his resignation. Partners distanced themselves. Longtime allies suddenly couldn't return his calls. People love success. They tolerate arrogance. But they abandon liability without hesitation. I watched it all from a distance, not with triumph, but with a strange calm. The outcome no longer felt personal. It felt inevitable. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I recognized immediately, his father. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "I won't take much of your time." I waited. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," he continued. "Not for him. For us. For the things we didn't see. Or chose not to." I leaned against the counter, the smell of garlic filling the kitchen. "Thank you." "He's not doing well," he added quietly. "I know," I replied. There was a pause. "Do you hate him?" I thought about it honestly. The lies, the humiliation, the slow erosion of trust. Then I thought about the quiet mornings I now had, the steadiness in my chest, the way my children laughed more freely. "No," I said at last. "I just don't carry him anymore." That seemed to satisfy him. We ended the call gently, two people acknowledging an ending that had been long overdue. Later that week, my daughter came home with a permission slip for a school art showcase. "Can you come?" she asked, eyes hopeful. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. And I didn't. I sat in the front row, clapping as she stepped up to explain her painting, a wild swirl of colors she called New Beginnings. When she looked out into the audience, her eyes found mine, and she smiled like she knew she was safe. That moment mattered more than any courtroom victory. My son, quieter by nature, adjusted differently. One night, while we were doing homework, he asked, "Is Dad ever coming back?" I set my pen down. "He'll always be your dad, but not everything that leaves comes back the same way." He nodded slowly. "I like it better now." So did I. Not because life was easy, but because it was honest. A month later, I ran into my former best friend at a grocery store across town. The encounter was accidental, unavoidable. She froze when she saw me, cart half full, eyes darting like she might escape through the produce aisle. I didn't move. Eventually, she walked over. "I heard about everything," she said quietly. "I deserved what happened." I met her gaze. "This isn't about punishment." "Then what is it about?" she asked, voice cracking. "Boundaries," I replied. "And consequences." She nodded, tears welling. I lost him too. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. Just confirmation. "I hope you heal," I said, meaning it. We walked away in opposite directions, two lives diverging permanently. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone on the couch, scrolling through old photos, not to torture myself, but to mark the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. That's when another message came in. "Unknown. You handled everything with precision." Me. I handled it with necessity. "Unknown. There's a difference." I smiled faintly. "Me. Why did you help me?" There was a long pause before the reply appeared. "Unknown. Because I recognize someone who refuses to disappear quietly." I set the phone down. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, my home felt solid, grounded mine. For the first time since everything began, I didn't feel like I was reacting anymore. I was choosing. And the next choice I made would change more than just my past. it would redefine my future. By winter, the noise finally faded. No more late-night calls. No more legal letters arriving in thick envelopes. No more whispers carried through mutual acquaintances who thought they were bringing me news. Everything that could collapse had already done so. What remained was the quiet aftermath, the part no one warns you about. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than chaos. One morning, as frost traced pale veins along the windows, I woke before the alarm. The house was still. No tension in my chest. No rehearsed arguments waiting to be fought. Just calm. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the sky soften from black to blue. For years, mornings had begun with calculation. What mood he'd be in. What problem I'd need to solve before breakfast. What version of myself would keep the peace. That instinct was gone now, like a muscle that had finally been allowed to rest. My phone buzzed once on the counter. Unknown. Court finalized everything this morning. I closed my eyes briefly. Me. Thank you for letting me know. Unknown. You're officially free. Free. The word settled slowly like snow. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just real. Later that day, I went to the courthouse alone to collect the final documents. No entourage. No victory smile. Just a woman signing the last page of a chapter she hadn't chosen but had survived. As I walked out, I saw him across the street. He looked diminished. Not ruined. Not broken in the cinematic sense. Just smaller. His coat hung loosely. His posture slightly folded inward. For a moment, he didn't see me. When he did, he stopped. We stood there, separated by a few feet and an unbridgeable distance. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I waited. I never thought it would end like this, he said finally. I studied him, searching for anger. There was none left. Only clarity. It didn't end, I said. It concluded. He frowned, confused. You're still living, I continued. So am I. This is just where our stories stop overlapping. His eyes flickered with something like regret. Was there ever a way back? I answered honestly, yes. Before the lies. Before you made me an obstacle instead of a partner. He nodded slowly, as if accepting a verdict he'd known was coming all along. I hope you're happy, he said. I am, I replied, not defiantly, not cruelly. Just truth. He looked surprised by that. Then he stepped back, turned, and walked away without another word. That was the last time I saw him. Life didn't transform overnight after that. It didn't need to. It unfolded. I repainted the living room a soft, warm color I'd always liked but had been told was too much. I rearranged furniture without asking permission. I signed my name alone on forms and felt no absence beside it. The kids adapted in the way children do. Quickly, unevenly, honestly. My daughter became louder, more expressive. She filled the house with drawings and questions and laughter. My son grew steadier, less guarded. He stopped watching adults so closely, as if waiting for something to go wrong. One evening, while we were eating dinner, he looked up and said, "You smile more now." "I do." I asked. He nodded. "You're lighter." That night, I cried, not from pain but from release. In early spring, I received an invitation I hadn't expected. A professional event, small, selective. The kind I'd once turned down because it would have made him uncomfortable, threatened, dismissive. This time I accepted. I stood in a room full of capable, driven people and spoke without shrinking. I listened without second-guessing myself. When someone asked about my background, I didn't explain it away. I owned it. Afterward, a woman approached me. "You have presence," she said. "Not the loud kind. The kind that doesn't need permission." I thanked her, knowing exactly what she meant. Later that night, I checked my phone. "Unknown, you did well today." I smiled. Me, I did it myself. Unknown, I know. We never defined what that connection was. It didn't need a label. It existed on mutual respect, not rescue. On recognition, not dependency. Some things are strongest when they remain undefined. Months passed. Summer returned. On a warm evening, I sat on the porch while the kids played in the yard, their laughter drifting through the air. Fireflies blinked on and off like tiny signals. I held a glass of iced tea and let the moment stretch. I thought back to the woman I'd been, standing frozen in a hotel lobby, watching her life fracture in public. She'd felt powerless, small, replaceable. She had been wrong. What followed wasn't about getting even. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about refusing to disappear. About choosing precision over panic. Truth over performance. Silence over pleading. And that choice had changed everything. My phone buzzed one last time that night. Unknown, you don't need me anymore. I typed slowly. Me, I never needed saving. I needed space. Unknown, you took it. Me, I claimed it. I set the phone down and watched my children race toward me, breathless and happy, telling me about something small and urgent and wonderful. The past no longer pulled at me. The future didn't frighten me. I was exactly where I needed to be, standing in my own life, unafraid, unhidden, finally whole. And for the first time, I knew this wasn't ending. It was the moment everything truly began. The final change didn't arrive with noise or drama. It came quietly, so quietly I almost missed it. One ordinary morning, months after everything had settled, I stood in the hallway tying my daughter's scarf while my son searched for his missing shoe. Sunlight poured through the window, warming the floor. The house hummed with small, familiar sounds. Life moving forward without asking permission. That's when it struck me. I wasn't bracing for anything anymore. No sudden dread. No rehearsed defenses. No instinct to check my phone with a tightening chest. The vigilance I had lived with for years had finally loosened its grip. At school drop-off, my son paused before getting out of the car. "Mom," he said, hesitating. "I told my teacher you're the strongest person I know." I smiled. "That's sweet." He shook his head seriously. "Not because you're loud. Because you don't let people push you around anymore." I sat there for a moment after he closed the door, letting those words sink in. That afternoon, I cleaned out the last box from the garage, the one I'd avoided since the separation. Old paperwork, outdated devices, photos I didn't need anymore. At the bottom, I found a notebook filled with lists written in my old handwriting. To-dos, reminders, ways to make things easier for everyone else. On the final page, I'd once written, "Don't rock the boat." I tore that page out and threw it away. In its place, I wrote something new. "Protect your peace." That evening, as I cooked dinner, music played softly in the background. Something I liked, not something chosen to avoid commentary. The kids danced in the kitchen, careless and loud. Flour dusted the counter. Sauce simmered. Life felt full, not fragile. After they went to bed, I stepped outside and sat on the porch alone. The sky was deep and clear, stars scattered without urgency. I breathed slowly, deeply, the way I hadn't known how to before. My phone buzzed once. "Unknown, this is goodbye." I read it without surprise. Me, it already was. In the best way. "Unknown, I'm glad you found yourself." Me, I didn't find myself. I stopped abandoning myself. There was no reply, and there didn't need to be. Days turned into weeks, weeks into seasons. I took on new projects, made decisions without second-guessing, said no without guilt, said yes when my heart felt steady instead of pressured. I laughed more, slept better, trusted myself again. Occasionally, someone would bring him up, what he was doing now, where he'd landed, who he blamed. I listened politely, detached, like hearing about a stranger. He no longer lived in my body. He no longer lived in my thoughts. One night, my daughter crawled into bed beside me after a bad dream. She pressed her forehead against my arm and whispered, "You're always here." "I always will be," I said, and meant it. That promise to my children, to myself, had become the foundation of everything. I understood something then that I wish I'd known earlier. You don't reclaim your life in one bold move. You reclaim it in 1,000 quiet choices, in every boundary held, every silence kept, every step taken without looking back. The woman who once walked away from a hotel lobby without a word had become someone unrecognizable, in the best possible way. Not colder, not harder, just awake. This wasn't about winning. It was about waking up. And now, standing firmly inside my own life, I knew one thing with certainty. No one would ever mistake my silence for weakness again. Before you move on, do me one small favor. If my story resonated with you, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, and let me know what part stayed with you. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for sharing this journey with me. On your screen, you'll see more powerful life stories waiting for you. I hope to see you in the next one.